What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 30 preview, and I'm going to start off by talking about Liverpool. Nice and simple, should we sell our Liverpool players? And this question must have been asked by someone that watched the game against Chelsea last night, because Liverpool were pretty bad. I know they rotated some of their players, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but overall, it's just a poor performance. They never really caused Chelsea a huge amount of problems. I think Kepa made 3 saves. There was a headed block clearance from Fofana, I believe, but there weren't huge periods of that game where you felt the Chelsea defence was under a lot of pressure. And on the flip side, I'm not quite sure how Chelsea didn't score. It wasn't really a great night for Havertz or João Felix. If they were playing a better attacking team like Arsenal in Game Week 30, for example, that defence would definitely have conceded. So it's not looking great. Whether or not you should sell them probably depends on what your strategy is going forward and what the alternatives are. Personally, I think for the most part, if you've got the popular picks like Salah, Trent, Robertson, Van Dijk, who hopefully will be fit for the game in Game Week 30, you should probably just keep hold of them because the fixtures coming up for Liverpool are pretty good. And actually, they've not actually done that bad recently, the players that, I just mentioned. Like Salah, for example, he's only blanked since Game Week 23 in the game against Chelsea, which he only played 25 minutes, and I don't think that's something that's going to happen going forward. And the game against Bournemouth where he missed a penalty. Outside of that, every game week he's returned. So 1 goal against Man City in 29. Obviously did really well against Man United in 26. He didn't do anything against Palace, but he scored against Wolves in 25 and got the assist against Newcastle. So obviously you can question whether he's worth the amount of money for the returns he's producing, but you can't say that he's not doing anything from an FPL point of view. And similarly, the defence, look, don't get me wrong, they should have probably conceded against Chelsea last night, but they didn't. And actually, in the last 8 games, going all the way back to Game Week 23 against Everton, they've only actually conceded twice, and that was against Man City, which everyone pretty much concedes against, and Bournemouth in Game Week 27. So the Liverpool defence has been returning, and that is why, with the fixtures they've got coming up, I wouldn't be going out of my way to get rid of the likes of Trent, Van Dijk, Robertson, Salah, because okay, Game Week 30 is tough against Arsenal, but it's at least a home game. I think their record at home has been much better than away. Then after that, there are no game weeks where I'd be worried about having to play my Liverpool players because they've got Leeds away in 31, Forest at home in 32, West Ham away in 33. That is also a week where Man City are playing Arsenal, so it's not really a good fixture for either of those teams either. In 34, it's a double, so I wouldn't be worried that they're playing Spurs. And then if you had to keep hold of them after that, it's Brentford at home, Leicester away, Villa at home, and Southampton away. So in the next 6 matches, including the double in 34, only 2 of those are away from home. So I don't think there's a rush to sell your Liverpool players if you are, because if you're free hitting in 32, you're still going to want them presumably for the double in 34. And if you decide to free hit in 34 instead, so you could triple up if you wanted to and then not have to worry about holding them long term, that's fine. But they're also one of the teams that play in Game Week 32 and it's against Nottingham Forest at home, so you're probably going to want 1 or 2 of their players so that you can manage that week better. So I can't see many reasons, if you own the key Liverpool players, why you would be looking to sell them. Not a great performance against Chelsea, really bad against Man City as well, but they are 2 of the tougher teams, and after Arsenal it gets a lot better. I guess there's a different question whether you should buy their players right now, possibly not this week, and I gotta be honest, after watching that game against Chelsea, I did start thinking to myself, do I really need to load up on Liverpool players? Do I really want to get Salah if he's going to be rotated? But I just don't think that's something that's going to happen very often. Like, that is the first game Salah has been benched all season. Now, there is some slight concerns there because he came off early against Man City as well and didn't start against Chelsea. I know some people are saying maybe it's because he's fasting for Ramadan, but he's played these games before, right, while he's been fasting. So I don't think that's a huge issue. It could be because of the turnaround time, and there are some games, bearing in mind Liverpool got nothing else to play for now apart from positions in the league. There are some quick turnarounds coming up. So between 30 and 32, it's 17th to the 22nd of April, then it's the 26th of April in 33. The first game of 34 is the 30th of April, and obviously then you've got the second game in quick succession. But Salah has done that multiple times before, where he's played Premier League, then Champions League, then Premier League, then Champions League, etc. So I'm not really massively worried. Maybe Klopp was just trying to send a message to the team that you can't put out a performance like that against Man City. Whatever it is, I cannot imagine that Salah is going to continue to get benched going forward. So although I did have a split second where I was thinking, could I go for someone else instead? I don't think I will. And also, who would that alternative be? So if you're looking at double game weeks in 34, well, you could go for Man City, and I think a lot of people are going to have Haaland. Then they're looking for maybe one defender, possibly another attacker. And De Bruyne is the first name that springs to mind, but it's not like he's been starting every game either. So he played really well against Liverpool, 90 minutes, 1 goal, 1 assist. He was benched against Palace. He played 64 minutes against Newcastle, didn't play against Bournemouth. And to be fair, he started the 3 games before that, but he was also benched against Spurs. So if Man City remain in the Champions League, there's nothing to say that De Bruyne will start every single game. And I've spoken a lot about this midfield, where I'm keeping Rashford, Fernandes, my 2 Brighton midfielders, so I've only got 1 spot. So it's like Grealish or De Bruyne, or obviously people got Maddison recently, or Saka, or Salah. I still think because of the fixtures they've got coming up and the double game week, the amount of home games, I'm still probably going to go for him. And it's a similar conversation with the defenders. Like I've got Chilwell, for example. Is it worth removing him for a Liverpool defender? Possibly, especially if you're not free hitting in game week 32. But I don't think it's something I would go out of my way to do. I don't think they're essential or anything like that. So just to come back to the original question, I can't see many reasons if you already own the key Liverpool players why you'd need to sell them. If you've got like Gakpo, Firmino, Darwin Núñez, there's a big case for them to be sold because you don't know who's going to start for each game. But I think for the key players like Trent, Robertson, Salah, they're probably going to start most games. Obviously, they do have a straight-up replacement for Robertson in Tsimikas, even though I didn't think he was great last night. Trent can obviously be rotated as he was for Gomez. That might happen going forward. But unless you think there's a defender you absolutely have to have instead, they could still be worth the risk with the fixtures they've got. So Chilwell looking good, but obviously Champions League coming up, a blank in game week 32. Man City defence always looking good if you can pick one that's nailed. But outside of that, I don't think there's many defenders right now that are must-have. Trippier, maybe an Arsenal defender if you wanted to. So if I've already got one of those Liverpool defenders, I think I would keep them, see what happens against Arsenal, see what happens against Leeds, and if there's still issues, then you can look to move them on. But I think the fixtures are too good to warrant using transfers on them right now personally. But you know I like Liverpool players. I'm always hoping they can turn it around. Whether or not they will, let's see. Alright, so even if Haaland is declared fit for game week 30, can we go without him until game week 33, especially if you're on free hit 32? So the fixtures you'd be looking to ignore him for would be Southampton away in 30 and Leicester at home in 31, then potentially getting him back for Arsenal at home in 33. Although to be fair, if you've gone that long without him, that's quite a difficult game. You could maybe skip him for that week as well and just get him back in the double for 34. So you could potentially do that. If we just concentrate on game weeks 30 and 31 for a second, this is what the fixtures look like. So this week they've got Southampton away on the 8th of April. Then they play the first leg in the Champions League against Bayern Munich on the 11th of April, which is the Tuesday. The next game's on Saturday against Leicester at home. Then it's a Wednesday game for the second leg of the Champions League. Now, with everything we've seen so far with Haaland in terms of what matches he's played in the Premier League and in the Champions League, he can definitely do, when he's fit, a Tuesday to Saturday to Wednesday turnaround. I would expect him in normal circumstances to start every one of those 3 games, but obviously going from Saturday to Tuesday after you've been out for so long, that's a little bit more difficult. So even if he is declared fit and Pep says he feels good and he's been training, you'd have to say there's probably going to be limited minutes against Southampton, so that puts into question whether or not we would captain him, and I would say I probably wouldn't do it in those circumstances. I'm not actually sure what Pep can say which makes me absolutely certain of captaining him against Southampton. But what I will say is I do think they will try and get him on the pitch for that game if they can, whether it's off the bench or not, because otherwise he's missed the whole international break, which is 2 weeks, then he's missed the game against Liverpool, and if he misses the game against Southampton as well, that's quite a lot to have not played and not trained for, to then get thrown straight in against Bayern Munich. And I do think they will want him for that game. So if they can get him on the pitch for Southampton, they will. But if you're not going to captain him in that game, it's only really Leicester at home you're worried about. And if you've got someone like Harry Kane, for example, for game week 31, you could just look to captain him instead, right? So he's got Bournemouth at home. The other fixtures that week, by the way, Rashford and Fernandes against Nottingham Forest away, Salah against Leeds. So there are other captains you could go for. Although let's not beat around the bush here. If Haaland's fit for the game week 31 and he's played against Southampton and Bayern Munich, he's definitely the best captain. But if you're willing to go against that for 1 week, you could risk it. Because Southampton, there are serious doubts on how many minutes he will get. After that, it really depends, one, on exactly what Pep Guardiola says. We'll talk about that a bit more on Friday. But also, how or what your plan is to get him back in. So can you ignore him? That really depends on what your route is to get him back. And I know a lot of people, with the transfers they made in game week 29, they've blocked themselves from getting Haaland unless they take a hit or they get rid of Harry Kane. And I'm not sure either of those solutions are definitely are necessarily worthwhile. I might, in those cases, just go without him, because you know Harry Kane is going to play 90 minutes against Brighton at home in game week 30, then he's going to play 90 minutes against Bournemouth at home in game week 31, and you could definitely argue that for the next 2 weeks he's a better pick than Haaland. Likewise, would you take a hit when you don't think Haaland's going to get any more than 60 minutes? I mean, if you knew he was going to get 60 or 65, you'd probably risk it. But if you're not sure on that, is it worth a hit? Probably not. And then maybe you just reassess in game week 31 instead. If you're in a position like me, we'll just quickly come onto my team here. This is your front line and you've got 5.3 million in the bank and you can just do Toney to Haaland, then I will probably do that if I've got any assurances that he's at least going to get on the pitch. I will probably just take that risk because I think he'll probably then play against Leicester as well. But I'm not completely locked into making that move, right? We're going to talk about Toney a little bit more in a minute, but if my team looks okay and there are doubts about Haaland, I will happily roll this week and reassess in game week 31 instead. And if Haaland is still a little bit of a doubt, I'll probably just bring my transfer for Salah forward and just get him now and get Haaland later, rather than get Haaland now and Salah later. So it really depends on how your team is set up. What I wouldn't do is start trying to convince yourself that Haaland is somehow now bad because you can't get him. Because let's be honest, if he plays against Southampton for a good amount of minutes and against Leicester, he's going to be one of the best picks in FPL like he has been all season. But if there are doubts about his minutes, you could ignore him until game week 33 and just hope for the best. Because I'll tell you now, a lot of people are going to be put off captaining him, especially if Rashford does anything against Brentford, which hasn't been played at the time recording. But if he does, all of a sudden you've got a Rashford who's back in form and about to play Everton at home. A lot of people might shift to him. So I think it depends on the situation. For what it's worth, I'm probably going to bring him straight back in, but I'll wait and see what Pep Guardiola says on Friday. All right, let's talk about Ivan Toney. So do we keep Toney for the foreseeable if he avoids a booking against Man United, or is it too much of a risk to own him now? So just to clarify on the yellow card situation, if you get 10 yellow cards before your club has played 32 games, you get suspended for 2 matches, and Toney has 9 yellow cards. So if he gets one more, he'll be suspended for 2 matches. Once Brentford have played 32 games, and they're currently on 28 because I'm recording before the Man United match, that limit gets raised to 15. So Toney has to not get a yellow card until Brentford have played 32 matches. And given he's nailed on when he's fit, that means he's got to avoid getting a yellow in the next 4 games, which does seem pretty unlikely. But obviously from an FPL point of view, you're always going to know if that's happened before the next deadline. So if he plays Man United tonight, doesn't get a yellow card, well, he's available for game week 30, and if you want to, you can keep hold of him. Then he plays Newcastle. If he plays that game, doesn't get a yellow card, he's available for game week 31, so on and so on. The other thing with Ivan Toney is obviously the charges that have been brought against him, which we haven't really heard too much more on, but there's a lot of speculation that at some point he will be banned, and obviously people don't want to get into a situation where they've made their transfers, they still have Toney, then he gets banned and they have to deal with that. The only thing I can really think of is that's the kind of thing that would surely be announced midweek, right? It's not going to be announced on like a Saturday or a Sunday, and most deadlines for FPL are either 11 a.m. on a Saturday or 6:30 p.m. on a Friday UK time. And I feel like if you get to those deadlines and nothing's been said about Toney possibly getting a ban or something like that, it might not even happen, then he's probably safe to play that weekend. So as long as you can leave your transfers until as late as possible, he's probably okay to hold on to. Now, obviously, he is more of a risk than another player because, you know, I've got like Toney, Watkins and Kane in my team, and I'm not really worried about a sudden ban for Watkins or Kane. So in that regard, he is a bit more of a risk, but until we hear more about it, you can probably just keep playing him unless you've got a kind of better transfer to make. The only thing I would say is, if we look at the deadlines coming up, you've got a Saturday deadline for Game Week 30, Saturday deadline for 31. Game Week 32 deadline is Friday, but like I said, it's going to be 6:30. For Game Week 33, if he makes it that far without being suspended or banned, the deadline is 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Brentford don't play until the Wednesday. So could you possibly get into a case where you go through the deadline on Tuesday and then we get a ban announced on the Wednesday? Possibly, but that would feel like quite harsh. So if you got to Game Week 33 without getting that 10th yellow card, you can probably just keep hold of him for there. And I think, to be honest, like Toney is the third highest scoring forward. We know all the things that are great about him, right? He's just a really good all-round FPL option. And if you want to keep him for Newcastle at home, Wolves away and Villa at home, and he's free to play, then why not just do that? Like for me, if I want to get Haaland in this week, then it makes sense to remove Toney because he is at more of a risk than the other players, both from the charges and the yellow card kind of limit that's looming as well. But ultimately, if he's available to play that deadline, you can keep hold of him, and he's brilliant. There's no rush to get rid of him. That's just why that I'm going to do it. So is he too much of a risk? Not necessarily. He's more of a risk than other players. But while he's available, you can keep him if you want to. There's no issues with that. All right, so Shiva FPL, I'm pretty sure you asked the same question in the final thoughts video on Friday. What should we do with Iheanacho? Now, in that video, it was about taking a -4. And I said I would only do it if you were bringing in a forward that you wanted to keep for the next kind of 3 to 5 weeks. Otherwise, I would just hope that he would start one of the games in double game week 29. And that didn't happen. So even with Bournemouth at home this week, I just cannot see what reason there is to keep Iheanacho, because even though Brendan Rodgers is gone, he's still not being started, even though I think he's one of Leicester's best players. And again, another game last night where Leicester didn't win. They're in the relegation battle. It's not going well, and yet Iheanacho is not getting the minutes. And it's just one of those annoying things in FPL where he starts like 6 games in a row, then all of a sudden gets like no minutes against Villa, 18 against Palace, and 1 against Brentford. You just cannot keep him unless you get word that he's going to start against Bournemouth at home. We're just probably not going to get that early team news, because after that, Man City away is a tough fixture. They have got some decent ones from 32 onwards, and they do have a fixture in blank game week 32. But what does it matter if the guy isn't going to start? So he's not necessarily like a must-sell this week. If you've got 11 other players you can play instead, you can maybe reassess for 31, save a transfer and use 2 free transfers to deal with him. But ultimately, you cannot trust him going forward. He has to go. If you're looking at the best options to bring in, well, Ollie Watkins, if you've got the extra cash, is still a great option. He's in great form right now, cannot stop scoring. Nottingham Forest at home, Newcastle at home, Brentford away, plays in 32, Fulham at home in 33. It does get a bit tougher after that, but as a shorter term move, he looks pretty good. If you want someone that's closer to his price range, then you've got someone like Isak, and I'm not going to be able to find... Oh yeah, here he is. I thought he looked really good, by the way. I know he's looked good generally, but against Man United, he was excellent again. Didn't get any returns, but obviously got the 2 goals against Forest, 1 against Wolves. I think whether or not Wilson plays, he should be on the pitch as well. And Newcastle got some good fixtures coming up. Brentford away, then Villa away. They play in game week 32 against Spurs. After the blank in 32, the fixtures get better. So Everton away, Southampton at home. They have got Arsenal at home in 35, but in 36, they're probably going to have a double game week of Brighton at home and Leeds away. So Isak looks like a pretty good long-term pick as well. And if you want someone cheaper, so if you haven't got the money to go above Iheanacho's price, then I think you're looking at Brennan Johnson, who's on 103 points, actually in the top 5 for total points for forwards. Pretty impressive. But I will say their fixtures coming up are quite tough. They've still got to play before the end of the season. Man United and Liverpool, maybe you think their defences are worth targeting, fair enough. But Man United, Liverpool, Brighton, Brentford, Chelsea and Arsenal. So it's a pretty tricky run for Nottingham Forest before the end of the season. Otherwise, you've got Solanke, who's probably the cheapest nailed-on forward that's going to start every single game. And to be fair, Bournemouth have been putting up some pretty good numbers recently. I think Solanke had at least 4 shots last night. They've also got some fairly tough fixtures. Spurs away, Chelsea at home, Man United at home as well in game week 37. But outside of that, you've got Leicester, West Ham, Southampton, Leeds, Palace, Everton. I think Solanke is still a pretty good pick if you need someone a bit cheaper. So to come back to the original question, what to do with Iheanacho, whether or not you get rid of him this week or next week, he has to go, right? Unless Daka and Vardy get injured before Bournemouth, and then you know Iheanacho is pretty much certain to start, you just cannot be assured of his minutes going forward. I think if you've got the money, then Watkins or Isak look like good picks. If you need to go a bit cheaper, I'd probably be looking at Solanke. Alright, for those of us with a wildcard and free hit left, what's the best strategy? I'm considering wildcard now and free hit in game week 32. So a lot will depend on whether you've still got your bench boost chip to play or not. If you do have to play it still, the next best opportunity is probably double game week 34, in which case I would prefer to wildcard as close to that as possible, which would be game week 33. And then whether or not you use the free hit in 32 or later on will really depend on how well your team can handle the next few weeks. So if you've got a bench boost, I would probably try and wildcard in 33 if you can. If you don't have the bench boost left to play, which I'm going to assume from this scenario, then whether or not you should use the wildcard now or later on really depends on how well your team is set up to handle the next few weeks. If you think you can handle game weeks 30 and 31 without any issues and then free hit in 32, then I think wildcarding in game week 33 or even 34 itself, if you don't have another chip to play, is probably the way that I would prefer to do it, because most people that have got the free hit left are either going to use it in blank game week 32 or double game week 34. Some people might use it in a different week, but for the majority, that is where they're going to use it. Now, I don't think either of those strategies is bad, because it's always going to be team dependent, but I think the team that you're going to free hit in 34 is going to be a team largely made up of players that are still good for you for the next few weeks of the season after that, right? So the main 4 teams you're going to target on a free hit in 34 are Liverpool, Man City, Man United and Brighton. Now, Liverpool don't have any more doubles after 34, but they got some good single game week fixtures. Man City and Man United have another double game week after 34, and Brighton have 2 more double game weeks after that. So I think it's better to just wildcard, set yourself up for game week 34, and also just keep those players afterwards as well. And obviously the other players you'd have in your squad would be like Newcastle players, because they're also going to double again. So I just can't see a huge advantage if you've got your wildcard left still to free hit in 34. So I think you're definitely free hitting in 32 instead. The only reason not to do that is if you really don't want to get rid of your Arsenal triple up, you want to carry them the whole way through. Well, in game week 34, they play Chelsea. Maybe you could free hit them out that week, keep them for the rest of the season afterwards, and just have your double game week players for 34. But for most people, in my opinion, the best strategy is something similar to what I've done. You're just wildcarding later, where you go with less Arsenal players, maybe 1 or 0, set your team up with the double game weekers for 34, who also double again, and then free hit in 32 if you need it. Obviously, if your team looks really bad for 30, 31, then you can set it up for those weeks and the rest of the season. But if you feel like it looks pretty good, I would try and save it as late as possible, because if we suddenly get a bunch of injuries to all those players I'm talking about keeping for the rest of the season, you can easily wildcard out of it and get in all the ones that are going to play instead. So without a bench boost, I think I'd probably be looking to wildcard now in game week 34, because even if you were to use it in 33, which again is not a bad strategy depending on what other chips you got to play, Man City are playing Arsenal, right? So if you, for example, have limited your amount of Arsenal players right now, that's fine, because you can free hit them in 32, then you can ignore them for Man City away, and not have to get them back. And obviously you don't necessarily need loads of Man City players for Arsenal at home either, and you can decide who to get in on your wild card in 34. So that's probably what I would do if I could. I'd leave my wild card till 34. If I'm bench boosting in 34, I'd wild card in 33. No issue with doing it in game week 30, but only if you feel like your team really needs it. Alright, should we consider buying Julián Álvarez? And I feel like the answer is quite simply yes, you can consider it if Haaland is ruled out, But no, you probably shouldn't consider it if Haaland is fit, because Haaland being fit and available plays a big part into how many minutes Alvarez gets. We know they can play together because it's already happened a couple of times this season, but it doesn't happen that often. We know how good Alvarez is. He'd probably be a first choice starter for most other teams in the league. I would love him at Man United, for example. But when Haaland is fit, he just doesn't get the minutes. And you can see that from recent games, right? Played really well against Liverpool, 1 goal, 1 assist, 90 minutes. But of course, Haaland didn't play, right? That's why he got 90 minutes. He wasn't even in the squad. 32 against Palace, 0 against Newcastle, 90 against Bournemouth, 2 against Forest, 0 against Arsenal. So he's played 90 minutes in 1, 2, 3 games since game week 22. And outside of that, he's never got past 45 minutes. So he cannot be relied upon when Haaland is fit. And you can turn around and say, he played so well against Liverpool, how can Pep Guardiola drop him? I would just say, look at Pep Guardiola over the last 5 seasons, and that is your answer. So if Haaland is ruled out for game week 30, you could look at Alvarez as a short-term punt. And I think he's even so good, you could consider him as a differential captain against Southampton away. Likewise, if he's not available for Leicester, Alvarez is another captain opportunity there. And to be honest with you, if Haaland was definitely ruled out for the next 2 weeks, I would consider doing Toney to Alvarez as a short-term punt because not many other people are going to own him. But if Haaland is fit for Southampton away, I just can't see many reasons to look at Alvarez. But I will try and end on a positive note. He's only 6 million. Now, when I think about my own team, and again, you might have different preferences to how you want to build your team. I've talked a lot about this midfield 5, so there's no room for Grealish and De Bruyne if that's the midfield that I go for. I'm going to have Haaland up front, and I'm probably going to have Ederson in goal. And again, I'm not going to get into that massively. That's just the current plan. Now, if I wanted to go for a third Man City player, bearing in mind I've got no slots in that midfield, I could possibly go for a defender. So Ruben Diaz, for example, has started a lot of games now. Ever since game week 23, he's played 90 minutes each time. John Stones, when he's fit, is someone you'd expect to play as well. So possibly I could go for one of them. But if I decided to do Chilwell to Trent, for example, instead, so let's say I put myself through the pain and misery of owning a Liverpool defender, then suddenly, and ignore the money, right? I would get rid of Harry Kane, etc. There's no midfield slots or defender slots for a Man City player. So potentially, I could take out Watkins and go for Alvarez and just bench him most weeks, but maybe play him in double game week 34 and hope that he gets at least one start. Because from all the plans I've made over the next few weeks, in game week 34, there's not really a forward that's an out-and-out must-buy to go next to Haaland. So if Haaland was out for 30 and 31, maybe I could just get Alvarez in and just keep hold of him for 34 and just play him and hope for the best. But that's all it really is. It's just hoping for the best. Because I know when Haaland is fit, he's going to mostly play. The only thing that could possibly play into our hands is whether Pep just doesn't trust Haaland's fitness and mainly wants him for the Champions League games, and then Alvarez might play in the Premier League, but obviously they're still fighting for the title, and if Haaland is his first choice striker, you think he's going to play the majority there as well. So I fully get why people are looking at this, because the guy is absolutely brilliant. Love watching him play, and when he does play, he often gets attack and returns as well, but I just don't think there's anything we've seen so far this season that makes me confident he's going to get regular minutes going forward. So really, we need to wait and see what Pep says, and if he rules Haaland out, short-term punt. If he doesn't, I probably won't be going for him. But let me know whether you're going for Alvarez in the comments below. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll catch you again tomorrow.